This morning, the National Weather Service in Hanford flagged an operational heat signal across California's San Joaquin Valley. Widespread moderate heat risk, triple-digit heat, and pockets of major heat risk near urban areas. One signal would be unusual. Several signals together are harder to dismiss. The advisory had already covered the San Joaquin and Kern River valleys. The forecast discussion said parts of the valley had a 60 to 90% chance of reaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot and dry conditions were raising regional fire risk. And for California agriculture, 95 degrees Fahrenheit is not just hot. It is the threshold where high heat procedures begin, including a 10-minute preventative cool-down rest period every 2 hours. But that is not the most dangerous part. The headline is not only the afternoon temperature. The hidden number is the recovery window. This is not just a heat wave. This is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system. The danger is not only what the thermometer says at 3 in the afternoon, it is what the body is unable to repair before the next shift begins. So the question is no longer simply how hot the Central Valley will get. The question is, what happens when heat reaches the body, the field, the water jug, the shade break, the clinic, the road, and the food system? Like, subscribe, and comment, because this map is not only showing heat, it is showing where labor risk may appear first. By early morning, the Central Valley was no longer just a place on a forecast map. It was an operating surface. The first signal came from the National Weather Service in Hanford. The office had already described a pattern of hot and dry conditions across the San Joaquin Valley, with triple-digit heat returning to the lower elevations. The words sounded familiar, because California has heard them before. Hot, dry, valley, advisory. But in an emergency dashboard, familiar words do not mean harmless conditions. They mean the system has seen this kind of load before, and the load is arriving again. At the same time, the National Heat Risk System was showing more than simple temperature. Heat risk does not only ask how hot the air will become, it asks how unusual that heat is for the date, how long it may last, how warm the nights may remain, and what kind of health impact could appear in the population. That matters because a valley afternoon near 100 degrees Fahrenheit is not just a weather value, it is a signal that the day has entered the zone where outdoor labor, emergency medicine, transportation, and household cooling all begin to overlap. On their own, these signals could be treated separately. A heat advisory could be treated as a weather product. A heat risk category could be treated as a colored map. A hot afternoon could be treated as a seasonal inconvenience. A warm night could be treated as a footnote. Together, they describe one larger configuration. The valley was taking thermal load. That is the first thing to understand. Heat in the Central Valley does not arrive into empty space. It arrives into orchards, vineyards, dairies, packing sheds, irrigation districts, 2-lane farm roads, labor buses, mobile homes, clinics, substations, cold storage facilities, and small towns built around work that often begins before sunrise. The map may be digital, but the receiving system is physical. Before many offices open, farm crews are already moving. Trucks are already passing fields. Irrigation lines are already pressurized. Supervisors are already checking which blocks must be worked first. Workers are already carrying water, gloves, hats, sleeves, tools, and the memory of yesterday's heat. The official warning sits on a government server, but the warning is also entering a body that may have slept in a room that never fully cooled. This is why the day cannot be understood as a single temperature. It has to be understood as a sequence. Before sunrise, the first question is not how hot the afternoon will become. The first question is how much recovery the night allowed. If overnight lows only fell into the upper 60s or low 70s, that may sound mild in ordinary conversation. But for a person who spent the previous day under direct sun, carrying metabolic heat from labor, and returning home to limited cooling, the night is part of the event. It is the period when the body is supposed to unload. If the night does not unload enough, the next day begins with debt. By mid-morning, the visible weather begins to catch up with the hidden condition. The sun angle rises, the soil begins to radiate, metal tools warm, vehicle interiors heat quickly. A parked truck becomes difficult to re-enter. A water bottle left outside is no longer refreshing. Shade becomes a moving target. The difference between a manageable morning and a dangerous morning may be the distance to water, the timing of a break, and whether someone notices a worker slowing down before that worker says anything. According to the National Weather Service, the heat risk framework is designed to help identify heat that can affect health, especially when it reaches levels that strain people without reliable cooling or hydration. In the Central Valley, that phrase cannot remain abstract. Reliable cooling is not guaranteed in a field. Reliable hydration depends on logistics. Reliable rest depends on supervision, communication, work pressure, and whether a crew can stop without falling behind. The dashboard, therefore, has more lights than the weather alert alone. One light is the afternoon high, one light is the overnight low. One light is the heat risk category. One light is the work rule threshold. One light is the location of the crew. One light is the distance to shade. One light is whether emergency responders can find the exact field if someone collapses. The map shows heat. The operation shows exposure. By late morning, the valley begins to separate into different versions of the same event. In a cooled office, the day is uncomfortable. In a school, administrators may monitor outdoor activity. In a hospital, staff may think ahead to heat illness, dehydration, heart strain, and older patients whose homes are not cooling well. On a road crew, asphalt becomes part of the heat source. In a field, the body is not just standing in hot air, it is working inside a microclimate made by sun, soil, plants, irrigation, clothing, and effort. This is where the official signal becomes local. Near an urban edge, heat can be held by pavement, buildings, and nighttime radiating surfaces. In a rural field, the pattern may be different, but not necessarily safe. Open fields can lose heat more quickly at night, but they can also offer less shade during the day. Irrigated land may cool the air in one part of the day while raising humidity in another. The valley is not one uniform oven. It is a patchwork of heat environments, and workers move through that patchwork while doing tasks that produce heat inside the body. That internal heat is often missing from the public map. A person sitting still and a person lifting, bending, walking, cutting, or hauling are not receiving the same event. The air temperature may be the same, but the body load is not. Labor adds heat from within. Sun adds heat from above. Soil adds heat from below. Clothing protects from radiation and dust, but it can also hold warmth. Sweat is supposed to carry heat away, but sweat only works when evaporation can keep up. The forecast shows weather. The field receives load. By noon, the day has moved into the threshold zone. This is where California's outdoor heat illness prevention rules become more than a document. OSHA requires access to water, access to shade, training, emergency procedures, and cool-down rests when workers need them. When the temperature reaches or exceeds 95 degrees Fahrenheit in agriculture, high heat procedures are triggered, including a minimum 10-minute preventative cool-down rest period every 2 hours. That rule is not a detail. It is a clue. It tells us that the state does not treat 95 degrees as just another warm day for outdoor labor. It treats it as a point where the work system must change. Communication must improve. Observation must increase. Supervisors must watch for alertness and signs of heat illness. Workers must be reminded to drink water. Emergency procedures must be ready before the emergency begins. But a rule does not automatically cool a body. The space between the rule and the worker is where the risk lives. A shade structure has to be close enough to use. Water has to be cool enough and available enough to matter. A worker has to feel able to stop. A crew leader has to notice symptoms. A phone has to connect. Directions to a remote field have to be clear. A vehicle has to be able to reach the location. A clinic has to have capacity. Each step may seem small until heat turns all of them into one chain. That chain is why the valley matters. California's Central Valley is not only a climate zone, it is a food production engine. It is a place where weather moves into national supply through labor. When a heat advisory appears over this region, it does not only describe conditions over land, it describes conditions over work that feeds households far beyond California. The exposed worker in the field is connected to harvest timing, crop quality, packing schedules, refrigeration, trucking, grocery shelves, and prices that may appear much later in places that never felt the heat directly. A weather event becomes a labor event. A labor event becomes a food system event. The danger is not that every field will fail, or that every worker will become ill, or that one advisory can explain the future by itself. That would be too simple. The real danger is that the system can appear to function while absorbing more stress than the public can see. Fruit can still be picked. Trucks can still move, a forecast can still pass. But inside the operating day, the margin may be thinning. Margin is the quiet number in a heat event. How much time before the afternoon peak? How much shade before dizziness? How much water before dehydration? How much rest before the next row? How much sleep before the next shift? How much clinic capacity before cases stack? How much grid capacity before cooling demand rises? The Central Valley is used to heat, but systems are not tested only by what they are used to. They are tested by timing, accumulation, and the parts that do not recover fast enough. A hot day in June is not automatically a disaster, but a hot day after a warm night, during a work period, over a labor force with limited control over schedule, under rules that must be actively enforced in real time, is not just ordinary summer, it is a configuration, and configurations are what operational dashboards are built to catch. By afternoon, the alert has already changed form. It began as a forecast, but now it has entered decisions. Should a crew shift earlier? Should work slow down? Should water be moved closer? Should shade be repositioned? Should a supervisor call an early rest? Should a worker report a headache? Should someone keep working because the paycheck matters? Should a clinic prepare for more heat-related visits? Should a family run cooling longer at home, knowing the bill may rise? The map does not answer those questions, it creates them. That is why the official signal matters, not because it predicts every outcome, and not because every warning becomes a crisis. It matters because it gives the system a chance to act before heat becomes visible as injury. Once heat illness is obvious, the warning has already traveled too far. It has moved from atmosphere into field, from field into skin, from skin into blood, from blood into the nervous system, from the nervous system into a decision that may come too late. This is not just a heat wave, this is a recovery window failure, moving through California's farm labor system. The phrase matters because it changes what we watch. If we watch only the afternoon high, we miss the night. If we watch only the map, we miss the shift. If we watch only the advisory, we miss the water distance. If we watch only the official rule, we miss the moment when a worker decides whether asking for rest is safe, affordable, and possible. By evening, the day may appear to loosen. The sun lowers, shadows stretch. The worst number on the thermometer may pass. For a viewer at home, that can feel like the end of the event. But for the body, the event is not over when the maximum temperature is recorded. The body still has to remove heat. The worker still has to get home. The room still has to cool. The heart still has to slow. The kidneys still have to rebalance fluid and salt. Sleep still has to arrive. If the night does not cool enough, the operational dashboard never fully resets. That is the part hidden inside the official language. A heat advisory has a start and end time. A shift has a start and end time. A forecast period has a boundary. But a human body does not always recover on that schedule. Heat can cross midnight. It can cross into the next morning. It can turn yesterday's exposure into today's vulnerability. So, when the National Weather Service issues the alert, the day should not be read as one isolated weather story. It should be read as a sequence of transfers. Heat transfers into air transfers into fields transfer into labor transfers into bodies transfer into clinics, households, payroll decisions, and the food system. The official signal is the beginning. The damage, if it comes, begins later and smaller. It begins in the distance between a row and the shade. It begins in a water jug that is too warm. It begins in a 10-minute rest that arrives after the body needed 20. It begins in a worker who feels the first sign of dizziness and keeps moving because the crew is still moving. That is why the headline number cannot carry the whole story. The next clue is not only how high the thermometer climbs, it is the threshold where a workday becomes a biological load test. The headline number is 100. Not because 100 degrees Fahrenheit is the highest temperature the Central Valley has ever seen. It is not. The valley knows heat. The farms know heat. The roads, canals, orchards, packing sheds, and small towns know what a hard summer afternoon feels like. But a headline number does not become dangerous only because it is unprecedented. It becomes dangerous when it crosses the operating thresholds of the people and systems underneath it. According to the National Weather Service in Hanford, parts of the San Joaquin Valley had a strong chance of reaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit during this heat signal. In Celsius, that is about 37.8 degrees. In ordinary conversation, 100 degrees sounds like a round number. In the body, it is not round. It is a line where ordinary cooling begins to compete with exposure. A number like that changes the day before it reaches its peak. It changes what time a crew starts. It changes how fast the first water containers are emptied. It changes whether shade is close enough or only technically available. It changes how quickly a parked truck becomes unbearable. It changes whether a supervisor sees a slower worker as tired, sick, or falling behind. It changes whether a worker decides to speak up or decides to keep going because the row is not finished and the paycheck matters. The number is not just temperature. It is the workday being pulled out of position. At 100 degrees Fahrenheit, heat is not simply surrounding the body. It is negotiating with the body. Every movement adds internal heat. Every step through soft soil, every lift, every bend, every reach, every crate, every tool, every minute under direct sun adds load from inside. The air is hot, but the labor is also producing heat. That is the part many maps cannot show. A person standing still in the shade and a person working in a field are not living through the same number. The thermometer may read 100. The body may be receiving more. That is why the second number matters just as much as the first. For California outdoor workplaces, 95 degrees Fahrenheit is not just a hot afternoon. It is the high heat threshold under Cal OSHA rules. In Celsius, that is about 35 degrees. When outdoor agricultural work reaches or exceeds that point, high heat procedures are supposed to begin. Agriculture workers must receive a minimum 10-minute preventative cool-down rest period every 2 hours. Supervisors must pay closer attention. Communication has to work. Water has to be available. Shade has to be reachable. Emergency response cannot be improvised after someone falls. That tells us something important. The state does not wait for 110 degrees to treat outdoor labor as a serious heat problem. The state threshold is 95 degrees. That is lower than the headline number. It is lower than the number most people remember. And it means that a day does not have to become historic to become operationally dangerous. A forecast near 100 degrees is therefore not one number. It is two systems colliding. The weather system says the valley is heating. The labor system says the rules of work must change. The body says the margin is narrowing. To understand why, imagine the same temperature in 3 places. 100 degrees in a car with air conditioning is uncomfortable until the engine starts and the cabin cools. 100 degrees on a city sidewalk is oppressive, but a person may step indoors. 100 degrees in a field is different. The worker cannot simply leave the crop. The task has a schedule. The crew has a pace. The distance to shade may be real. The sun is not filtered by walls. The ground is part of the heat. The job itself keeps generating more heat inside the body. This is why a familiar number can still be a serious signal. The Central Valley has a long relationship with heat, but familiarity can hide escalation. If a place is known for hot summers, people may hear 100 degrees and translate it as normal. But operational risk does not ask whether a place has seen heat before. It asks whether the exposure is landing on people who can recover, systems that can adapt, and rules that can be carried out in time. A number becomes dangerous when it meets a weak margin. That margin can be physical. A worker may begin the day already tired from a warm night. A worker may have lost fluid the previous afternoon. A worker may not be fully acclimatized if the heat arrives early or intensifies quickly. A worker may be taking medication, recovering from illness, or dealing with a condition that changes heat tolerance. The forecast does not list those details, but the body carries them into the field. The margin can be logistical. Is the water close enough? Is the water cool enough? Is the shade large enough for the crew? Is the rest break timed to the body or timed to the row? Does the crew leader speak the same language as every worker? Does every worker understand that a cool-down rest is allowed? Does someone know the exact location if an ambulance is needed? The margin can be economic. A person may understand the risk and still keep working. Heat decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are made inside rent, groceries, family remittances, transportation costs, debt, job insecurity, and the fear of being seen as slow. A forecast number enters those pressures. It does not replace them. It amplifies them. That is how 100 degrees becomes more than heat. It becomes a test of whether the workday can bend before the body breaks. There is also a timing problem. The highest temperature often arrives after the day has already done damage. By the time the thermometer reaches its afternoon peak, the worker may have been in motion for hours. The first signs of heat stress may appear before the headline number is recorded. Headache, heavy sweating, muscle cramps, unusual fatigue, dizziness, confusion, a rapid heartbeat. These are not dramatic cinematic signs at first. They can look like someone slowing down, someone pausing longer, someone making a mistake, someone saying they are fine because the crew is still moving. The headline number arrives late. The body has been counting from the start. This is one reason heat can be so deceptive. A flood announces itself by occupying space. Smoke can be seen and smelled. A hurricane has a visible shape on radar. Heat can enter quietly. It can sit in the air and make the ordinary day more expensive for the body. It can turn a normal task into a calculation. It can make a worker decide whether to drink now or save water for later. It can make a supervisor decide whether the crew can stop again. It can make a family decide whether to run cooling overnight. The number is public. The negotiation is private. When the National Weather Service says triple-digit heat, the public hears the forecast. When a farm worker hears it, the number may mean something more specific. It may mean the work starts earlier. It may mean the field will feel different by mid-morning. It may mean the ride home will feel longer. It may mean sleep will be harder if the room does not cool. It may mean tomorrow begins with less strength than today. 100 degrees is also a pressure on infrastructure, not always in the dramatic way people imagine. It does not need to cause a blackout to matter. It raises cooling demand. It warms homes. It makes vehicles harder to use. It can increase emergency calls. It affects roads, equipment, and cold storage. It changes how long food can sit outside before cooling. It pushes refrigerators, air conditioners, pumps, and electrical systems closer to their working edge. In agricultural regions, that matters because heat is not only above the crop, it is around the entire chain that moves the crop. The field receives it first. The worker receives it directly. Then the schedule receives it. Then transport receives it. Then storage receives it. Then the household receives it. Then the clinic receives it if the body cannot carry the load. The headline number is the first visible sign of this chain, but it is not the chain itself. That is why comparing 100 degrees to a comfortable indoor day can mislead. A person indoors may think of heat as an outside condition. A person working outdoors experiences it as a total environment. The air is hot, the light is sharp, the surface reflects heat, the task demands movement. The clothing may protect the skin but hold warmth. The body sweats, but sweating costs water and salt. The heart moves blood toward the skin to release heat, but the muscles still need blood for work. The kidneys are pulled into the calculation. The brain must keep decisions clear. Heat becomes a system inside the body, and that internal system has limits. 100 degrees Fahrenheit is also a seasonal signal. In the deepest part of summer, it may sound expected in parts of the valley. But when heat arrives as an early or returning risk, it can catch the system before habits, staffing, acclimatization, and household cooling have fully adjusted. The first serious heat episodes of a season are often dangerous because bodies and operations may not yet be tuned to the load. The calendar says the work must continue. The body may not have caught up. That is the meaning of being pulled out of position. A season has expected rhythms: morning work, afternoon caution, evening cooling, night recovery. The old rhythm assumes that heat has edges. It rises, it peaks, it falls. The next day begins again. But when the peak is high, the work is exposed, and the night does not provide enough release. The rhythm weakens. The day does not end cleanly. Yesterday leaks into today. Still, the headline number matters. It is the alarm people understand. It is the number that gets repeated. It is the number that tells a household to check the cooling, a clinic to anticipate risk, a horriforist to adjust procedures, and a worker to measure the day differently. The problem is not that the headline number is meaningless. The problem is that it is incomplete. 100 degrees tells us the air is hot. 95 degrees tells us the work rules must change. But neither number, by itself, tells us whether the body recovered last night. Neither number tells us how far the shade is from the row. Neither number tells us whether the worker feels safe asking for rest. Neither number tells us whether the next shift begins before the body has returned to baseline. That is the deeper danger in this heat signal. The public number may look like a simple forecast, but inside the Central Valley farm labor system, it becomes a biological load test, a logistics test, a supervision test, and a recovery test all at once. The thermometer gives the headline, The body writes the rest of the story, and the next number is quieter than 100 degrees. It appears after sunset, when the official peak has passed, when the field empties, when workers return home, when the body tries to unload the heat it carried all day. That number is the overnight low, but that number is not the real trap. The real trap is what happens when the night is too warm to give the body back its tomorrow. The visible number makes the headline, the hidden number writes the damage. During the day, the public watches the high temperature. The forecast says 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or close to it. The afternoon becomes the image people remember. The sun is high, the road shimmers, the field is bright. The number feels obvious because it happens in daylight, but heat risk does not end when the sun goes down. For farm labor in California's Central Valley, the more dangerous question may begin after the official peak has already passed. How low does the temperature fall overnight? How long does the body have to cool? How much heat does a bedroom release before morning? How much water and salt does the body replace? How much sleep is possible before the next shift begins? That is the hidden number, the overnight low. Not because 70 degrees Fahrenheit sounds extreme, it does not. In ordinary weather language, an overnight low in the upper 60s or low 70s can sound almost comfortable. It may not trigger the same reaction as 100 degrees in the afternoon. It may not look dramatic on a map. It may not become the number in a headline, but for a worker who spent the previous day under direct sun, lifting, bending, walking, cutting, carrying, or irrigating, the night is not background. The night is repair time. The body uses the night to unload. The heart rate can fall, skin temperature can drop, sweating can slow, the kidneys can begin restoring fluid balance, the nervous system can settle, muscles can recover, sleep can rebuild attention and coordination. A cooler room is not only comfort, it is part of the body's heat safety system. When that cooling window shrinks, the next day changes before it begins. This is not just a heat wave, this is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system. That sentence matters because it shifts the camera. The danger is not only the heat that strikes the body at 3 in the afternoon, it is the heat the body is still carrying at 3 in the morning. It is not only the peak, it is the unfinished recovery after the peak. According to California's environmental health officials, warm nights can increase heat danger because the body has less opportunity to recover from daytime heat. They also warn that humidity can make the problem worse because sweat does not cool the body as effectively when the air is already holding more moisture. That means a night that looks mild on a forecast can become a failed reset for someone whose body needs a deeper release. A cool night gives the body back its margin. A warm night spends it. This is the part many people miss. Heat injury is not always a sudden strike from a single afternoon. It can be cumulative. It can build across hours. It can build across shifts. It can build when one day ends without enough recovery and the next day begins on top of it. A worker does not walk into the field as a blank slate. The body arrives with yesterday inside it. If yesterday involved heavy sweating, the body may still be behind on fluid. If yesterday involved dizziness or cramps that were ignored, the nervous system may already be strained. If yesterday ended in a room that stayed hot, sleep may have been shallow. If sleep was broken, attention may already be slower. If the next shift starts before dawn, the body may be asked to perform again before it has returned to baseline. The day looks new, the body knows it is not. That is why the overnight low is not just a weather number. It is a biological checkpoint. If the low drops enough, the body may have a chance to recover. If the low stays elevated, recovery becomes incomplete. The difference may not be obvious to someone reading the forecast from a cooled room, but in a labor system, small differences can move through the entire shift. A worker who slept poorly may drink water later than needed. A worker who is already dehydrated may fatigue faster. A worker whose heart is still working hard to manage heat may be less able to handle the next afternoon. A worker who is tired may miss an early symptom. A supervisor may see slower work, but not understand that the problem started the night before. The map shows the low temperature. The body receives the missed recovery. This is also why the word exposure is not enough by itself. Exposure is not just standing in heat. Exposure is time under load. It is the amount of heat received, the amount of work performed, the humidity around the skin, the clothing on the body, the access to water, the access to rest, the chance to sleep, and the chance to cool before the next demand arrives. The hidden number changes all of that. A one-day heat event and a multi-day heat event are not the same because bodies need recovery between them. A single afternoon can hurt. But repeated afternoons with warm nights between them can trap the body in a cycle where it never fully returns to safety. That is the trap. The night is supposed to be the exit. When the night stays warm, the exit narrows. In the Central Valley, that problem is made more complicated by housing and income. Not every worker returns to a well-insulated home with reliable air conditioning. Some return to crowded rooms. Some return to older housing. Some may limit cooling because electricity costs matter. Some may sleep in spaces that hold heat long after sunset. Some may need to care for children, cook, commute, or prepare for the next day before they can rest. The official low temperature is measured outside. The recovery happens inside a room. Those are not always the same world. An outdoor low in the upper 60s can still leave an indoor room warmer if the building absorbed heat all day. A low in the low 70s can still mean a worker's body never gets the deep cooling it needs. A home without effective cooling can turn the night into an extension of the shift. The person leaves the field, but the heat follows. This is the difference between weather and lived load. Weather says the day ended. The body says the event continued. There is also a timing problem. Farm labor often starts early to avoid the worst afternoon heat. That strategy can reduce some exposure, but it also shortens the recovery window. If a worker gets home late, eats, washes, cares for family, prepares for the next day, and then wakes before dawn, the number of actual recovery hours may be far smaller than the clock suggests. The forecast may show 8 hours between evening and morning. The body may only receive 5 hours of useful recovery, and if the room is warm, even those hours are not fully restorative. That is how a moderate-looking night becomes part of a severe day. The danger does not have to announce itself dramatically. It can appear as a worker who begins the day slightly slower, a person who needs more water sooner, a person who jokes about being tired, a person who misses breakfast because the morning came too early, a person who thinks the headache will pass, a person who does not want to stop because everyone else is still working. Heat illness can begin before anyone uses the words heat illness. It can begin as a decision. Keep going. Wait until break. Finish this row. Do not slow the crew. Do not lose hours. Do not look weak. Do not make trouble. The hidden number gives those decisions less room. When recovery fails, the body's warning signals may appear earlier and escalate faster. Sweating may increase. Thirst may become urgent. Muscles may cramp. The head may ache. The heart may beat harder. Thinking may become less clear. Coordination may slip. The worker may not feel like a person entering a medical emergency. The worker may feel like someone having a bad day in a hot field. That is what makes the pathway dangerous. The body can be in trouble before the story feels dramatic. The official warning can be active before the worker knows the body has crossed a line. And the night before can be part of that crossing. The public often asks whether the temperature will break a record. But record heat is not the only heat that injures. A non-record day can be dangerous if it lands on tired bodies, weak cooling, hard work, and short recovery. A familiar Central Valley temperature can still become hazardous if it arrives with elevated nights and limited control over rest. The question is not only, is this heat historic? The question is the recovery sufficient? That is a different kind of question. It asks about bedrooms, not just fields. It asks about sleep, not just sun. It asks about water and salt, not just air temperature. It asks about whether a worker can stop early enough, cool enough, and return home to a place that actually releases heat. It also asks about enforcement. A regulation can require water and shade during the shift, but it cannot by itself cool a worker's room after midnight. A supervisor can call a rest break, but that rest break may be starting from a body already carrying heat debt. A crew can begin earlier, but an earlier start can also mean less sleep. Each adaptation solves one problem and can expose another. This is why heat risk is a system problem, not because every part fails at once, because every part depends on recovery. The body depends on the night, the workday depends on the body, the crew depends on the pace, the farm depends on the crew, the crop depends on timing, the clinic depends on cases arriving early enough to treat, the household depends on enough cooling to let people begin again. If the recovery window shrinks, the whole chain becomes more brittle. That brittleness is not always visible. Fields may still look orderly, workers may still arrive, crews may still move, trucks may still leave, the public may see no collapse, but a system can continue operating while losing margin. Heat often does not break a system all at once. It removes options. It removes the option to delay rest. It removes the option to work through symptoms. It removes the option to sleep poorly and recover anyway. It removes the option to treat the night as separate from the day. That is why the hidden number matters more than it appears to. The afternoon high tells people when to worry. The overnight low tells us whether the body gets another chance. And in a region where farm labor is tied to early mornings, outdoor work, heat thresholds, and limited control over the pace of the day, that second number can decide whether the next shift begins with margin or begins with debt. The visible event is outside. The damage begins inside. Inside the body. Inside the room. Inside the hours that were supposed to cool down but did not cool enough. So the Central Valley heat signal cannot be read only by its maximum temperature. It has to be read by what remains after the maximum passes. It has to be read by the heat still stored in buildings, roads, soil, and bodies. It has to be read by the worker waking before sunrise, not fully restored, stepping back into a day that will ask for more. The hidden number is not separate from the headline number. It is what makes the headline number carry forward. The 100-degree afternoon is the strike. The warm night is the hold. And when the hold lasts long enough, the next clue is not on the thermometer at all. It is in the physics of sweat, humidity, sunlight, wind, soil, and labor. To understand why the body cannot always cool itself, the story has to move from the night air into the mechanism of wet bulb heat. To understand why the body cannot always cool itself, the story has to move into a number most people never see on the evening forecast. It is called wet bulb globe temperature. That phrase sounds technical, but the idea is simple. Air temperature tells you how hot the air is. Wet bulb globe temperature asks a more dangerous question. How much heat is the body actually receiving? And how hard will it be for that body to get rid of it? That is a different question. A thermometer in the shade may say 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but a worker in a field is not standing inside a shaded thermometer box. The worker is under direct sun. The worker is surrounded by soil, plants, irrigation moisture, clothing, tools, and movement. The worker is producing heat from inside while receiving heat from outside. The body is not just reading the air, it is absorbing an environment. Wet bulb globe temperature tries to capture that environment. It considers heat, humidity, sunlight, and wind. Those four pieces decide whether sweat can do its job. The mechanism begins above the valley. A hot pattern settles over the region. Air sinks. Clouds stay limited. Sunlight reaches the ground with little interruption. The valley floor begins to heat. Roads heat. Rooftops heat. Bare soil heats. Orchard rows heat. Metal surfaces heat. Equipment heats. Vehicles heat. The air temperature rises, but the land surface is rising with it. Then the mechanism moves downward. Sunlight does not only warm the air, it strikes the ground. It strikes the worker's clothing. It strikes the neck, arms, face, and back. It reflects from pale soil and dry surfaces. It is absorbed by darker surfaces and released again as radiant heat. A person can feel this without knowing the physics. Standing in the sun at the same air temperature as the shade feels different because the body is receiving radiation directly. That radiation matters in a field. There may be no wall to block it. There may be no roof. Shade may exist, but it may be away from the row. The worker may be moving between plants, bending into low crops, climbing on equipment, carrying tools, or walking along furrows where the ground itself is part of the heat source. The heat is not only above, it is below. It is around. It is inside. The body's first major defense is sweat. Sweat is not just wet skin. It is a cooling system. When sweat evaporates, it carries heat away from the body. That is why dry air with a breeze can sometimes feel less dangerous than humid heat at a lower temperature. Evaporation is the escape route, but humidity narrows that route. When the air is dry, sweat can evaporate more easily. When the air is moist, evaporation slows. The skin may be wet, but the cooling may be weaker. The body can be sweating heavily and still failing to cool enough. That is a cruel detail. A worker may feel sweat pouring off the body and assume the system is working. But if evaporation cannot keep pace, sweating becomes a warning, not a solution. This is where irrigation enters the story. In an agricultural valley, water is not only in canals and pipes, it is part of the local heat environment. Irrigated soil can change the air near the ground. Water evaporates. plants release moisture. Fields can create microclimates that are different from nearby roads or dry land. During the day, that moisture can sometimes reduce air temperature close to the surface. Evaporation can cool the immediate area, but the same moisture can also raise humidity, and humidity can make sweat less effective. Researchers studying agricultural heat exposure have warned that this creates a complicated pattern. Irrigation may help reduce some daytime heat stress by cooling the surface, but it can also increase nighttime heat stress by adding moisture to the air and raising the wet bulb component of heat. In simple language, the field can feel somewhat cooled by water during one part of the day and still make the body's recovery harder later. That is the turn. The system that helps crops endure heat can also change the way heat reaches workers. This does not mean irrigation is bad. It does not mean every irrigated field is more dangerous than every dry one. The evidence does not need that kind of exaggeration. The point is more precise. In farm country, heat is not just air temperature. It is air temperature plus moisture, radiation, wind, soil, vegetation, and labor. Change any one of those, and the body receives a different event. The field can feel cooler by day and still make recovery harder by night. That is why wet bulb globe temperature matters. It sees more of the load than the ordinary thermometer. It asks whether the body can lose heat, not only whether the air is hot. Now add labor. A resting body produces heat because metabolism never stops, but a working body produces much more. Muscles burn energy. The heart pumps faster. Breathing increases. Blood moves toward the skin to release heat, but muscles still demand circulation to keep working. The body becomes a distribution problem. It must deliver blood to the muscles for labor, to the skin for cooling, to the brain for clear decisions, and to the kidneys for fluid balance. In cooler conditions, that balance can hold. In high heat, the margin shrinks. In high humidity, the escape route narrows. Under direct sun, the incoming load rises. During heavy labor, the internal load rises. That is the mechanism. It is not a mysterious force. It is a series of transfers. From atmosphere into sunlight. From sunlight into soil. From soil into the field. From the field into the skin. From the skin into sweat. From sweat into evaporation, if evaporation can happen fast enough. From the body into the heart, kidneys, and brain, if cooling cannot keep up. By the time the danger becomes visible, the system is already carrying load. That is why heat illness can appear suddenly to an observer while building slowly inside the worker. A person may be fine, then tired, then slower, then confused, then in trouble. But the body was negotiating the whole time. It was trying to hold core temperature within a narrow range. It was moving blood, producing sweat, preserving pressure, conserving fluid, and protecting the brain. The body does not have endless options. If it sweats more, it loses more water and salt. If it sends more blood to the skin, less may be available for working muscles. If fluid drops, the heart must work harder. If cooling fails, core temperature can rise. If core temperature rises enough, the nervous system begins to suffer. A hot field can become a medical pathway. This pathway begins before collapse. It begins with thirst, then fatigue, then headache, then cramps, then dizziness, then nausea, then confusion. Sometimes the person stops sweating, sometimes they do not. Sometimes they look flushed, sometimes they look simply exhausted. Sometimes the first visible sign is a mistake, a stumble, or a person who does not respond normally. In a field, those signs are easy to misread. A worker moving slowly may look tired. A worker pausing may look behind pace. A worker with a headache may believe water will fix it. A worker with dizziness may wait for the next scheduled break. A worker may not want to be the first person to ask for shade. The body can be sending a warning while the social system is still asking for productivity. Wet bulb heat is dangerous because it hides inside ordinary work. The air is hot, yes, but the real load is the combination. Hot air plus sun. Sun plus soil. Soil plus irrigation. Irrigation plus humidity. Humidity plus sweat. Sweat plus labor. Labor plus time. Time plus insufficient night cooling. That is how a forecast becomes exposure. The mechanism also moves through clothing. Farm workers often need protection from sun, dust, plants, chemicals, insects, and injury. Long sleeves, hats, gloves, face coverings, and layers can protect the skin. They can reduce sunburn. They can reduce direct radiation. They can be necessary for the work, But clothing also changes heat exchange. It can trap warm air near the body. It can slow evaporation. It can make the body's cooling system work harder. This is not a simple choice between safe and unsafe clothing. The worker is managing multiple hazards at once. Skin protection can increase heat burden. Less clothing can increase sun exposure and other risks. The correct solution is not to blame the worker for what they wear. The correct solution is to understand that the worker is inside a hazard stack. Heat is one layer. Sun is one layer. Dust is one layer. Job speed is one layer. Pay pressure is one layer. Hydration logistics are one layer. Communication is one layer. Each layer changes the body's margin. Wind is another part of the mechanism. A breeze can help sweat evaporate. It can move humid air away from the skin. It can make heat more tolerable. But wind is not always reliable inside rows, orchards, equipment zones, or low crop fields. Air movement near the worker may be blocked by plants, terrain, vehicles, or the posture of the job. A forecast wind speed may not describe the air around a worker bent over a crop. A small breeze at a weather station does not guarantee relief in a row. This is why a single public number can fail. Air temperature is measured in a standardized way, usually away from direct sun and specific field surfaces. That is useful for weather science. But a body in a field is not a standard instrument. It is a living system doing work. The worker is not only exposed to heat, the worker is generating heat. That is the biological difference. A body at rest tries to keep core temperature near normal. A body at work produces extra heat from muscle activity. The harder the work, the greater the internal heat. If the outside environment allows heat loss, the body can keep up. If the outside environment blocks heat loss, the internal heat becomes dangerous. This is why the same day can be survivable for one person and hazardous for another. Age matters, health matters, acclimatization matters, medications matter, sleep matters, hydration matters, previous exposure matters, work intensity matters, shade matters, humidity matters, wind matters, access to rest matters. The weather is the same only from far away. Close to the body, the event is different. Researchers studying farm worker heat exposure in California have found that recommendations for rest can change substantially depending on wet bulb, globe temperature, the time of day, acclimatization, and location. That is exactly what an operational system needs to hear. Heat risk is not fixed by one number. It shifts across hours and fields. A break schedule that seems adequate at one moment may be inadequate later. A field that seems manageable at 7 in the morning may not be manageable by noon. The mechanism moves with the day. Morning begins with residual heat from the night. The sun rises, radiation strengthens, work intensity climbs, water demand rises, the ground warms, humidity may linger, wind may or may not help. By early afternoon, the body may have spent much of its margin before the highest air temperature appears. Then comes the evening problem. The sun falls, but the heat does not vanish. Soil releases stored heat. Buildings release stored heat. Pavement releases stored heat. Irrigated surfaces may continue adding moisture. A worker returns home, but the body still has to cool. If the room is warm, if humidity is high, if sleep is short, recovery is incomplete. The mechanism crosses from field into bedroom, from the atmosphere into the crop, from the crop into the body, from the body into the home, from the home into tomorrow's shift. That is why recovery window failure is the correct frame. The event is not only a peak, it is a loop. Daytime exposure creates heat debt. Nighttime warmth prevents full repayment. The next shift begins with debt still on the body. Then the next day adds more. A single hot afternoon can injure, but repeated heat with inadequate recovery can change the entire risk profile. It turns a worker's body into a system that is never allowed to reset. It turns normal fatigue into a warning sign. It turns the next 10-minute rest into something that may be arriving too late. The visible danger is outside. The hidden mechanism is inside. But the inside mechanism is not separate from the outside world. It is shaped by field design, irrigation timing, shade access, wage pressure, transportation, housing, and the official rules that determine when a workplace must shift into high heat procedures. The body is where the science becomes unavoidable. No regulation can repeal evaporation. No supervisor can negotiate with core temperature. No forecast can make sweat work when humidity and radiant heat overwhelm it. The system can only reduce the load before the body reaches its limit. That means moving water closer, making shade real, not symbolic, changing pace, starting earlier without stealing sleep, observing symptoms, letting workers stop before collapse, treating rest as prevention, not lost time. The mechanism is physical, the solution has to be operational. That is the sober part of the story. Heat risk is not magic, and it is not only fate, it is a chain of known forces: air temperature, humidity, radiation, wind, metabolic heat, clothing, hydration, rest, and recovery. Because the chain is known, the weak points can be found. But because the chain runs through bodies, every delay has a cost. The forecast says heat. Wet bulb heat explains why the body may not escape it. The field receives sunlight, soil heat, humidity, and labor demand. The worker receives all of that at once. The sweat system tries to respond, the heart increases effort, the kidneys manage the shortage, the brain tries to keep decisions clear. If recovery fails at night, the same system is asked to do it again before it has repaired. This is not just a heat wave. This is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system. And now the mechanism has to become personal, because heat does not injure an average. It does not collapse a statistic. It enters one body at a time. The next clue is one worker, one shift, one field, and the small decisions that decide whether the mechanism stays invisible or becomes an emergency. Before sunrise, one worker steps out of a small house on the valley floor and into air that has not fully cooled. The day has not become hot yet, not in the way the public imagines heat. The sun is still low. The roads are dim. The field is not yet bright. A person looking only at the morning might think the danger is still hours away, but the worker already knows something the map cannot show. The body did not start from zero. The room stayed warm deep into the night. The fan moved air but did not make the air cool. Sleep came in pieces, a few hours, then waking. A drink of water, a turn to the other side, the sound of another person in the house moving before dawn, the alarm before the body felt ready. This is where the mechanism enters a human life. Not at the afternoon peak, not when the thermometer reaches 100 degrees. It begins when the body tries to recover and the night does not give enough back. The worker puts on long sleeves because the sun will be sharp later. A hat, gloves, a covering for the neck. The clothing is not a mistake. It protects against sun, dust, branches, insects, and the rough surfaces of the job. But protection has a cost. Every layer changes how heat leaves the body. Every layer creates a small pocket of warmth between skin and air. The worker takes water. Maybe it is enough. Maybe it is not. The first bottle is cool at home, then less cool in the truck, then warm later in the field. The worker may already know this pattern. Water begins as relief and becomes something the body needs even when it no longer feels refreshing. The ride to the field is part of the exposure. People often imagine heat risk beginning when work begins, but the body is already in the day. A crowded vehicle, a long commute, a stop for fuel, the first light spreading across the valley, other trucks moving in the same direction. Crews entering the same thermal map from different towns, different rooms, different levels of sleep. The body does not experience climate change as a graph. It experiences it as a shift that does not release its grip. At the field, the work begins while the air is still manageable. This is one of the main adaptations. Start earlier, use the cooler hours, avoid the worst of the afternoon. It makes sense. It can reduce exposure. It can save lives, but it also depends on recovery. If the worker slept badly, an earlier start means the body has less time to repair. The adaptation to daytime heat can steal from the night. The system solves one problem by tightening another. That is the kind of trade-off that heat creates. At first, the worker moves normally. The hands know what to do. The body knows the rhythm. Bend, reach, cut, lift, walk, repeat. The pace is not cinematic. It is ordinary. That is what makes the scene important. Heat risk does not always enter a disaster movie. It enters routine. The sun rises higher. The field changes. Radiation reaches the back of the neck. The soil begins to release warmth upward. The air between rows feels still. Moisture from irrigation or plants changes how sweat behaves. The worker begins producing heat from inside because muscles are working, and receiving heat from outside because the field is warming. The body tries to respond. Blood moves toward the skin. Sweat forms. Breathing changes. The heart works harder. The body is trying to keep the core temperature steady while the job continues to demand movement. It is not one system managing one stress. It is one body managing several stresses at once. Sun from above, heat from the ground, moisture in the air, clothing around the skin, work from inside the muscles, time pressing forward. The worker drinks water. Maybe the crew leader reminds everyone. Maybe the water is close. Maybe it is at the edge of the field. Maybe stopping means walking away from the task and returning behind pace. Each small detail changes the body's load. In public language, hydration sounds simple. Drink water. In field language, hydration is logistics. Where is the water? How far away is it? Is there enough? Is it cool? Can the worker stop now? Does the worker have to remove gloves? Is the crew moving? Is the supervisor watching? Does drinking water mean losing rhythm, losing time, or looking weak? The heat does not arrive alone. It arrives with social pressure. By mid-morning, the worker feels the first signs. Not collapse, not emergency, just heaviness. The body is slower to respond. Sweat is steady. The mouth feels dry again sooner than expected. The worker keeps moving. This is the dangerous middle zone. The body is sending information, but the information is easy to reinterpret. A headache can be explained as poor sleep. Heavy sweating can be treated as normal. Cramps can be dismissed as part of hard work. Dizziness can be hidden for a few more minutes. Fatigue can be folded into the ordinary hardship of the job. Heat illness often begins as something that does not yet have a name. That is why the human pathway matters. The mechanism does not jump from forecast to hospital. It passes through decisions. Drink now or later. Speak up or keep going. Rest now or wait. Tell the supervisor or stay quiet. Walk to shade or finish the row. These decisions are not made by a free body in an empty field. They are made inside a job. The worker may be paid by the hour, by output, or through a structure where speed still matters. The worker may worry about being replaced. The worker may need the full day's wages. The worker may know that everyone else is tired too. The worker may not want to become the problem the crew has to stop for, so the body negotiates with the paycheck. That is not a metaphor, it is a pathway. Heat moves from the atmosphere into the field, from the field into sweat, from sweat into thirst, from thirst into a decision, from the decision into risk. A shade break may come. Under California rules, outdoor workers must have access to shade and cool-down rests, and in agriculture, high heat procedures require regular, preventative cool-down rest when temperatures reach the high heat threshold. On paper, this is a safety system. In the field, the safety system has to become real at the exact moment the body needs it. If shade is close, the worker can get there sooner. If shade is far, the walk itself becomes part of the load. If rest is accepted, the body may cool. If rest is delayed, the body spends more margin. If symptoms are recognized, the day changes. If symptoms are normalized, the mechanism keeps moving. The worker reaches shade. The air under shade is better, but it is not magic. Shade blocks radiation, but it does not erase the heat already stored in the body. The worker drinks. The heart is still working. Sweat is still on the skin. The worker may feel better after a few minutes and return to the row, but feeling better is not always the same as being fully recovered. That distinction is crucial. Cooling is a process, not a switch. A 10-minute rest can matter. It can prevent injury. It can be the difference between continuing safely and crossing a line. But if the body began the day with heat debt, if the field is humid, if the work is heavy, if the afternoon will climb higher, 10 minutes may not feel like restoration. It may feel like a pause inside a load that is still growing. The worker returns to the field. The day is brighter now. The temperature is climbing toward the headline number. The public may still be waiting for the peak. The body is not waiting. It has been counting since morning. The next symptom may be smaller than viewers expect. A mistake with a tool, a pause that lasts too long, a worker who stops talking, a person who becomes irritable, a person who says they are fine but looks unfocused, a person who walks unevenly, a person who is sweating heavily or suddenly not sweating the way others expect. Heat does not always speak loudly. Sometimes it speaks through attention that matters in farm work because attention is also safety. Tools, vehicles, ladders, irrigation equipment, knives, bins, uneven ground, and moving machinery all require coordination. A worker affected by heat is not only at risk of heat illness, the worker may also be at higher risk of injury because the brain and muscles are no longer operating with the same clarity. The pathway widens. A body under heat strain becomes a workplace safety issue, A workplace safety issue becomes an emergency response issue. An emergency response issue becomes a geography issue. If the worker worsens, someone has to notice, someone has to call, someone has to describe the location. A field is not always an easy address. Roads may be unmarked, cell service may be weak. The ambulance needs more than the name of a farm. It needs a route, a gate, a canal crossing, a landmark, a person to meet responders. This is how heat turns into infrastructure. The worker's dizziness becomes a communication test. The communication test becomes a road test. The road test becomes a clinic test. The clinic test becomes a system test. But before any of that, the worker has to be believed. That is another hidden part of the pathway. Heat illness prevention depends not only on water and shade, but on trust. A worker has to trust that reporting symptoms will not cost the job. A supervisor has to trust the warning signs before they become severe. A crew has to treat rest as prevention, not weakness. The safety system has to move faster than the heat. If it does not, the body carries the delay. By afternoon, the worker may still be standing. That is important. The absence of collapse does not mean the system is safe. Many heat events are survived at a cost that does not appear in official numbers. A worker may finish the shift with a pounding headache. A worker may go home nauseated. A worker may sleep badly again. A worker may show up the next morning with less margin. That outcome may never become a hospital visit, never become a report, never become a statistic. But it still changes the body. It still changes tomorrow. This is the part of heat exposure that hides from the public. The official system records the most visible failures: emergency visits, hospitalizations, deaths, occupational illness reports. Those numbers matter, and they are already serious. But between safe work and recorded illness, there is a wide zone of unrecorded strain. People who felt sick and kept going, people who recovered at home, people who lost sleep, people who became slower, more vulnerable, more afraid of the next hot day. The body absorbs what the database may not capture. When the worker returns home, the field exposure does not end cleanly. The clothes are dusty and damp. The skin is hot. The muscles are tired. The head may still ache. There may be food to prepare, children to help, bills to think about. Another alarm to set. Cooling is not guaranteed. Rest is not automatic. Recovery has to compete with life. The worker lies down later than the body wanted. The room may still hold heat. The next shift may begin early again. That is how the loop forms. The atmosphere creates the heat. The field shapes it. The job intensifies it. The body carries it. The home may fail to release it. The next day receives it. This is not just a heat wave. This is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system, and it is moving through one person at a time. The worker in this story is not meant to represent every worker in the same way. Some have better protections. Some have better housing. Some employers respond aggressively and well. Some crews have water close, shade ready, communication clear, and supervisors trained to stop problems early. The evidence does not require pretending every field is identical. The risk is that the hazard does not need every field to be identical. It only needs enough weak moments to align. A warm night, an early shift, a long row, a distant shade structure, a worker who hesitates, a symptom that looks like ordinary fatigue, a rest that comes after the body needed it. That is how the mechanism becomes human, not by turning every worker into a victim in advance, but by showing where the load travels. The body is the place where weather, labor, housing, law, income, and infrastructure meet. A forecast map can show the outline of the event. It cannot show the moment a worker decides to keep going. That moment is where the next part begins. Because the worker is not the only weak point, the system has a small hinge, a narrow place where safety either arrives early or arrives too late. It is not the whole farm, it is not the whole valley. It is the 2-hour rest cycle, and the question of whether 10 minutes can reach the body before the heat does. The weak point is not the whole farm system. The weak point is 10 minutes arriving too late. That may sound too small for a story about Central Valley heat. 10 minutes. A rest break. A pause under shade. A drink of water. A worker sitting down before returning to the row. It does not look like infrastructure in the usual sense. It is not a dam, not a power plant, not a hospital wing, not a highway bridge, not a transmission line crossing the valley floor, but in an outdoor heat event. Time is infrastructure. A rest period is a cooling device. Shade is a medical intervention before the hospital. Water is not comfort, it is a control system. Communication is not paperwork, it is how the body gets help before the emergency becomes visible. California's outdoor heat rules recognize this. According to OSHA, when outdoor work reaches the high heat threshold of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, agriculture employers must use high heat procedures. Those procedures include closer observation, effective communication, reminders to drink water, emergency response readiness, and a minimum 10-minute preventative cool-down rest period every 2 hours. On paper, that is clear. In a field, the question is whether the paper can become real fast enough, because 2 hours in high heat is not just 2 hours. It is 2 hours of sunlight, work, sweat, radiation, humidity, walking, bending, lifting, carrying, and decision-making. It is 2 hours that may begin from a body already carrying heat from yesterday. It is 2 hours that may include a worker deciding not to speak up because the crew is moving. It is 2 hours that may include a symptom that looks like ordinary fatigue. The weak point is the gap between the scheduled rest and the body's actual need. That gap can be small enough to miss, large enough to matter. Imagine the rest cycle as a hinge. The whole workday turns on it. If the hinge moves early, the worker gets shade before the body crosses into danger. Water reaches the system before dehydration deepens. A supervisor sees early signs before confusion starts. The crew slows before heat becomes injury. But if the hinge moves late, the same rule becomes weaker. The worker reaches shade after the body has already spent too much margin. 10 minutes becomes a pause in an emergency that has already begun. Water arrives when the heart is already working harder. Shade arrives when the nervous system is already struggling. The procedure exists, but the heat got there first. The weak point is not the existence of a rule. The weak point is timing. This is why the 2-hour rest cycle is more than a workplace detail. It is the small operating part that connects science to survival. Wet bulb heat explains why the body struggles to cool. The rest cycle decides whether the system gives the body enough time to respond. In cooler conditions, a worker may tolerate longer stretches of effort. In high heat, the body's tolerance narrows. The difference between prevention and crisis may be whether cooling begins while the worker is still alert enough to recover quickly, or after the worker has begun to lose coordination and judgment. Heat safety depends on early action. Late action is treatment. Early action is prevention. That difference matters because heat illness can move faster than the social system around it. A worker may feel thirsty, then tired, then lightheaded. A supervisor may not see it immediately. A crew member may notice but wait. The worker may try to keep going until the next scheduled pause. The next pause may be 20 minutes away, then 10, then 5. But inside the body, the clock is not waiting for the schedule. The body does not recognize the timetable. The body recognizes load. If the load is too high, 2 hours can become too long. The rest cycle also depends on distance. A shade structure that exists at the edge of a field is different from shade that is close to the body. A worker in the middle of a large block may have to walk several minutes to reach it. That walk is work. If the path is under sun, the walk adds heat. If the worker is already dizzy, the walk is a barrier. If reaching shade takes too long, the rest break begins late before it even begins. Shade has to be reachable to be real. Water has the same problem. A water station that exists on site is not the same as water that is close enough, cool enough, and easy enough to use. If a worker has to leave the task, walk, remove gloves, wait behind others, drink quickly, and return under pressure, hydration becomes a procedure instead of a continuous protection. The body needs water before thirst becomes urgent. The job may allow water only when stopping feels possible. That is another weak point. Not the absence of water, the friction around using it. Heat exposes friction. It turns small obstacles into medical delays. A few extra minutes to reach shade, a few extra minutes before a supervisor notices, a few extra minutes before someone calls for help, a few extra minutes to explain a location. In mild weather, those minutes may not define the day. In high heat, they can change the outcome. This is how a system breaks without looking broken. The shade is present, the water is present, the rule is present, the worker is still exposed. That sentence is uncomfortable because it prevents an easy story. The problem is not always a total absence of protections. Sometimes the problem is that protections arrive in the wrong form, at the wrong distance, with the wrong timing, under the wrong pressure. A system can satisfy a checklist, and still fail the body if the body needs cooling sooner than the checklist delivers it. The 2-hour rest cycle is also a communication system. Someone has to know when the threshold has been crossed. Someone has to call the rest. Someone has to make sure every worker understands that the rest is preventative, not a punishment, not a favor, not a sign of weakness. Someone has to watch for people who do not speak up. Someone has to understand symptoms in the languages workers actually use. Heat illness prevention depends on words moving through a crew before heat moves too far through a body. That is harder than it sounds. A worker may describe dizziness indirectly. A worker may say they feel tired, or strange, or that their head feels heavy. A worker may not use the formal language of heat illness. A supervisor may hear the words but not grasp the urgency. A co-worker may notice a change but not know whether to stop the line. Communication is not just having a phone, it is having a shared understanding of what counts as danger. The weak point is sometimes a sentence not spoken soon enough. I need shade. I feel dizzy. Stop work. Call now. Where exactly are we? Those sentences are part of the safety infrastructure. So is trust. Without trust, a worker may keep symptoms private. The worker may fear losing hours. The worker may fear being labeled slow. The worker may fear that reporting symptoms will affect future work. Heat rules can exist, but if the worker does not feel safe using them, the body remains exposed. Trust is not emotional decoration, it is operational capacity. A system that cannot hear early symptoms will only hear late ones, and late symptoms are more dangerous. The 2-hour rest cycle also interacts with pay structure and pace. Even when workers are paid hourly, productivity pressure can still shape behavior. Crews may want to finish before the heat peaks. Supervisors may be managing harvest timing. Crops may have narrow windows. A delay can affect a schedule. A slower pace can create tension. Workers know this. They do not need anyone to say it out loud. Heat enters that pressure. The forecast says rest. The crop says hurry. The body says slow down. The paycheck says keep moving. This is why a heat event becomes a labor event. The body's safety depends on decisions made inside an economy. Water, shade, and rest are physical protections, but their use depends on power. Who can stop? Who can ask? Who is believed? Who decides the pace? Who carries the cost of delay? A 10-minute rest is simple only from far away. Close up, it is a negotiation. The weak point becomes even sharper when the worker has not recovered overnight. The rule may assume that the workday begins with a body ready to work, but recovery window failure means the body may begin with debt. If the worker slept in a warm room, if the previous day ended with dehydration, if the commute began early, then the first 2-hour interval is not starting from baseline. The body is already behind. In that case, a scheduled rest 2 hours later may be late before the day even begins. That is the hidden failure. The system may be organized around intervals. The body may be organized around accumulation. Those two clocks can drift apart. The official clock says work has just started. The body clock says yesterday is still here. This is why high heat procedures cannot be treated as a box checked at 95 degrees. They have to be understood as a response to accumulated load. The threshold matters, but the threshold is not the whole story. A worker who had a cool night, good sleep, enough water, close shade, and a lighter task is not in the same condition as a worker with poor sleep, heavy labor, distant water, and no full recovery. The same rule lands on different bodies. Operational safety has to see that difference. That means observation matters. OSHA emphasizes watching for alertness and signs or symptoms during high heat. That requirement is important because heat illness is not always self-reported. The person affected may not recognize the severity. Confusion can be part of the illness. Pride, fear, language barriers, and work pressure can all delay reporting. A system that waits for the worker to make a perfect report may wait too long. The supervisor's eyes become part of the safety system. The co-worker's attention becomes part of the safety system. The timing of the break becomes part of the safety system. The location of the water becomes part of the safety system. The address of the field becomes part of the safety system. That last piece is often overlooked. If heat illness becomes severe, emergency response has to reach a real place. Farms may be spread across rural roads, private lanes, gates, canals, and unmarked entrances. An emergency call that says someone collapsed in a field is not enough. Responders need location. They need access. They need someone to meet them. They need the difference between one entrance and another. They need a route that works. The weak point can become geography. A body overheats. A coworker calls. The call needs an address. The address is unclear. The ambulance loses minutes. The clinic receives the worker later. In high heat, minutes are not empty space. They are time during which core temperature may remain high. They are time during which confusion may deepen. They are time during which dehydration may worsen. They are time during which a preventable illness can become a catastrophic one. That is why emergency readiness is part of heat prevention, not an afterthought. But the smallest weak point remains the same. 10 minutes arriving too late, 10 minutes too far away, 10 minutes not understood as mandatory, 10 minutes treated as a delay instead of prevention, 10 minutes scheduled for the clock but not for the body. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable for any system that wants heat safety to be simple. It is not enough to say workers should drink water. It is not enough to say shade exists. It is not enough to say a rule is on the books. The question is whether the system can deliver cooling at the speed of heat. Heat moves continuously. Protections often move intermittently. That mismatch is the weak point. The valley can prepare for heat in many ways. Earlier starts, more water, more shade, more training, better communication, closer observation, clearer emergency directions, stronger enforcement, better housing cooling, smarter scheduling. These are not abstract solutions. They are ways of shortening the distance between danger and relief. The goal is not to make outdoor work risk-free in high heat. That may not be possible. The goal is to prevent the system from pretending that a body can carry unlimited load until the next scheduled pause. The goal is to make rest arrive before the body has to beg for it, because by the time a worker is confused, the system has already missed earlier signals. By the time a worker collapses, the map has already traveled too far. By the time an ambulance is called, the 10-minute rest that might have mattered is no longer a small detail. It is the moment that did or did not happen. This is not just a heat wave. This is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system. And the 2-hour rest cycle is where that failure either gets interrupted or passes through. If the system interrupts it early, the worker cools, drinks, recovers, and returns with margin. If the system interrupts it late, the worker returns with debt. If the debt carries into the night, the next day begins weaker. If the next day begins weaker, the same heat threshold becomes more dangerous. That is how a small component becomes a system risk, not because the whole farm collapses. Because the safety margin depends on a narrow window of time, the weak point is not visible from satellite. It may not appear in a county summary. It may not be obvious to the consumer buying fruit far away. It is a worker walking towards shade under a hot sky, hoping the body has not already crossed the line. History has already shown what happens when heat signals are treated as ordinary because the place is used to summer. The next clue is not theoretical. California has seen versions of this mechanism before, and the evidence it left behind should change how this warning is read. This is not speculation. A version of this mechanism has already left evidence behind. California has already seen what happens when heat is treated as familiar until the body count proves it was not ordinary. The clearest warning comes from the 2006 California heat wave, a prolonged and brutal event that did not behave like a single hot afternoon. It stayed. It accumulated. It entered houses, hospitals, workplaces, power demand, animal systems, and emergency response. It showed that heat is not only dangerous when it breaks a record, heat is dangerous when it denies recovery. That is the connection to the Central Valley now. Not a prediction that the same disaster is repeating in the same way, not a claim that every hot day becomes a catastrophe. The lesson is more precise. The same kind of mechanism, prolonged heat plus limited nighttime recovery plus exposed bodies, has already caused measurable harm in California. The past does not prove the future, but it shows what the mechanism can do. During the 2006 heat wave, the state recorded a sharp signal in heat-related deaths and illnesses. California environmental health officials later identified that year as one of the clearest examples of heat leaving a statewide health footprint. Emergency rooms saw the heat. Hospitals saw the heat. Public health surveillance saw the heat. Occupational systems saw the heat. The event did not remain outside as a weather story. It moved into bodies and then into institutions. That is exactly the pathway this video has been tracing. From atmosphere into field, from field into sweat, from sweat into the heart, from the heart into the clinic, from the clinic into public records, but the records are only the visible part. California officials have warned that heat-related illnesses and deaths are severely underreported. That means the official numbers are not a ceiling, they are closer to a floor. They count the events that reached a report, a diagnosis, a certificate, an emergency department, or an occupational illness system. They do not fully count the worker who got dizzy and recovered at home. They do not fully count the person who missed a shift because the body could not recover. They do not fully count the headache, the cramps, the nausea, the night without sleep, or the next morning that began weaker. Heat leaves evidence in records. It also leaves evidence in bodies that never become records. That is why 2006 matters. It proved that California heat can create a public health event without looking like a storm. There was no landfall, no surge line, no collapsed bridge that made the whole mechanism visible at once. The disaster moved through small spaces. Bedrooms, apartment rooms, work sites, animal facilities, clinics, emergency calls, cooling centers, hospital beds. The sky did not need to turn black. The danger was the absence of release. That is the part that echoes. In a heat event, the most important failure can be invisible until it is medical. A body fails to cool, a room fails to cool, a shift fails to slow, a system fails to notice early enough. Then the official count begins. The Central Valley has lived with heat for generations, and that history can create a dangerous assumption. People may believe that if heat is familiar, the system is prepared. But 2006 showed that familiarity is not the same as safety. A place can be used to heat and still be overwhelmed when timing, duration, exposure, and recovery align badly. The same is true for farm labor. A worker may know heat, a crew may know heat, a supervisor may know heat, a town may know heat, but knowing heat does not cancel the physics of the body. It does not make sweat evaporate when humidity is too high. It does not restore sleep in a hot room. It does not move shade closer by itself. It does not make a 10-minute break arrive before the body needs it. The precedent is not about surprise. It is about accumulation. The 2006 heatwave was not only a peak temperature story, it was a duration story. The heat continued long enough to push people and systems beyond normal adaptation. That is why warm nights mattered. That is why people without reliable cooling were more vulnerable. That is why older adults, outdoor workers, and people with medical conditions were placed at higher risk. That is why public health agencies learned to watch not only the hottest hour, but the sequence of hot days and insufficient nights between them. The same logic applies to Central Valley farm labor. A 100-degree afternoon is serious. A 100-degree afternoon after a warm night is different. A 100-degree afternoon after several warm nights is different again. The body is not a reset button. It is a living system with memory. A past heat event can teach that without claiming every detail is identical. The present has advantages that 2006 did not have in the same form. Forecast tools have improved. Heat risk gives officials a clearer way to communicate health danger. OSHA heat illness prevention rules now define high heat procedures for outdoor workplaces. Public awareness has grown. More agencies understand that heat can be a mass health threat, not just an inconvenience. Those differences matter. They are evidence of learning, but they do not remove the risk. A better warning only helps if it changes behavior before harm begins. A stronger rule only helps if it reaches the field in time. A public health lesson only helps if the most exposed people can act on it. The existence of protection is not the same as the arrival of protection. That is where history becomes uncomfortable. California learned from previous heat disasters, but the system still depends on implementation at the smallest scale. One crew, one supervisor. One shade location, one water station. One worker who feels safe reporting dizziness. One emergency call with clear directions. One room that cools enough for sleep. The past event was statewide. The present risk is local. The mechanism connects them. California environmental health officials have also identified occupational heat illness as a recurring problem. In state tracking, outdoor and physically demanding sectors stand out because workers are exposed not only to weather, but to metabolic heat from labor. Agriculture is central in that story. Farm workers often work long summer days, with limited control over schedules and tasks. And the work itself can make the body produce more heat at the exact moment the environment makes cooling harder. This is why farm labor cannot be treated as a side note in a valley heat advisory. It is one of the places where the warning becomes physical first. The historical record shows spikes in occupational heat illness during severe heat years, including 2006 and later hot years such as 2017. That pattern does not mean every farm is unsafe. It does not mean every employer fails. It means that when heat rises across California, occupational exposure shows up in the evidence. The workplace becomes one of the routes by which weather enters public health. That route is especially direct in agriculture. The worker is not sheltered from the hazard by walls. The job cannot always be moved indoors. The crop calendar does not pause easily. The body is part of the production system. This is the hard truth that history leaves behind. Heat damages people through ordinary dependence. People need wages. Farms need labor. Crops need timing. Families need food. The system keeps moving because it has to. The danger is that heat uses that necessity as a pathway. In 2006, many people were harmed not because they ignored danger, but because their options were limited. Cooling was not equally available. Recovery was not equally available. Medical vulnerability was not equally distributed. The same principle applies to workers now. A person may know the day is dangerous and still need to show up. A person may know rest matters and still hesitate. A person may know water matters and still be too far from it. Knowledge helps, but it does not replace power, logistics, and time. That is the lesson that has not been absorbed deeply enough. Heat safety is not only awareness, it is access. Access to cooling, access to rest, access to water, access to shade, access to sleep, access to emergency care, access to the right to stop before the body collapses. The precedent also warns against judging heat by drama. Heat disasters often look quiet while they are happening. People do not always evacuate from heat. There may be no single moment when the entire public understands the scale. The event becomes clear afterward, when deaths are reviewed, emergency visits are counted, workers' compensation cases appear, and public health analysts reconstruct the pattern. By then, prevention has missed its window. That is why the present signal matters before the damage is visible. When the National Weather Service issues a heat advisory, when heat risk rises, when the forecast points toward triple-digit afternoons and warm nights, the system is not being asked to panic. It is being asked to remember. It is being asked to treat heat as a load that can travel through the same pathways that caused harm before. The lesson from history is not that catastrophe is guaranteed. The lesson is that waiting for proof in the form of injury is too late. There is another important difference between past and present. The climate baseline is changing. California's heat risk is not only about isolated extremes. Warm nights have become a more important concern because they reduce recovery. Urban heat, housing quality, power costs, and work schedules shape who actually gets relief. For farm labor, the old expectation that night will reset the body is becoming less reliable in the periods when heat persists. That is the future echo inside the precedent. The past showed the mechanism. The present shows the exposure. The future asks whether recovery can still be assumed. In 2006, the state saw what prolonged heat could do when systems and bodies were pushed. In later hot years, occupational illness data again reminded officials that workers remain exposed. Today, Central Valley heat signals return over a region where food production depends on outdoor bodies moving through hot fields. That does not make disaster inevitable. It makes prevention urgent. And prevention has to be honest about what history really says. History does not say every hot day is the same. History does not say one advisory equals catastrophe. History does not say all harm can be blamed on one cause. History says heat has already found weak pathways through California before. Warm nights, limited cooling, outdoor work, delayed rest, medical vulnerability, underreporting, accumulated exposure, those are not imaginary pathways. They have left evidence. The dangerous mistake would be to treat the current heat signal as ordinary simply because the Central Valley is used to summer. The valley can be used to heat and still have workers who are not recovered. It can be used to heat and still have shade too far away. It can be used to heat and still have housing that stays warm after midnight. It can be used to heat and still have clinics that see the body after the prevention window has passed. The past does not repeat like a script. It returns as a pattern, and the pattern is visible now. Official heat signal, headline temperature, warm night, outdoor labor, recovery debt, small weak point, possible medical consequence. That sequence is what the 2006 precedent helps us see. It changes the meaning of the forecast. It turns the warning from a daily weather item into a system memory. The event now unfolding may pass without the worst outcome. That is possible, and it matters. Good preparation can work. Strong employers can intervene. Workers can be protected. Cooling can prevent injury. Rules can save lives. Forecasts can change behavior. The point of history is not despair. The point of history is timing. Act before the body becomes evidence. Because when the body becomes evidence, the mechanism has already traveled too far. That is the warning from California's past. It is not loud. It is not theatrical. It is a record of what happened when heat stayed long enough, when nights did not release enough, when exposed people carried more load than the system could see. The Central Valley heat risk returning now is not the same event, but it is speaking the same language. And once that language is understood, the story cannot stay inside one field or one worker. It widens into the system that depends on that worker being able to return tomorrow. The next question is larger than heat illness. It is what happens when a food system built around old seasonal assumptions enters a calendar where the recovery window keeps shrinking. This is not only a heat event, it is a calendar stress test for a food system built around outdoor bodies. That is the system pattern the Central Valley reveals. A heat advisory may last a few days. A forecast discussion may update every few hours. A temperature peak may appear and pass within an afternoon. But the systems underneath the weather do not move on the same clock. Crops move on biological time. Irrigation moves on water delivery time. Crews move on labor time. Packing facilities move on logistics time. Households move on income time. Bodies move on recovery time. When heat enters that calendar, it does not simply make the day hotter. It changes the sequence. The old assumption was that heat had edges. The morning could still be used. The afternoon could be managed. The night could reset the body. The next day could begin again. That assumption did not make heat harmless, but it gave the system a rhythm. Work could be shifted earlier. Water could be planned. Shade could be arranged. Crops could be harvested around known seasonal patterns. Families could expect that the worst heat would eventually release. The new stress is that the edges are less reliable. The day begins warm. The afternoon climbs fast. The night does not cool enough. The next morning begins before the body has recovered. That is not just a weather pattern, it is a timing failure. In the Central Valley, timing is everything. According to the United States Geological Survey, California's Central Valley grows more than 250 crops. It contains most of the state's irrigated land and produces a major share of the nation's food. That means the valley is not only a place where heat happens, it is a place where heat can move into the food system through labor, water, equipment, roads, refrigeration, harvest windows, and human recovery. A person far from California may never feel the hot air over Fresno, Kern, Tulare, Kings, or Madera counties. But that person may eat food that passed through the work system exposed to that heat. A heat signal over the valley, therefore, has two meanings at once. It is local weather for the people inside it. It is also a stress signal for a supply chain that reaches far outside the map. This is why the worker matters so much. The food system is often described through acreage, yield, water, prices, and transportation. Those numbers matter. They show scale. California farms and ranches bring in tens of billions of dollars in cash receipts. The valley's production is vast, but the system still depends on physical work performed in physical conditions. Even the most advanced supply chain has points where a body has to be outside. A crop can be valuable, a field can be productive, a warehouse can be refrigerated, a truck route can be optimized. But if the worker cannot safely return tomorrow, the system has lost a piece of its calendar. That is the pattern. Heat does not have to destroy a crop overnight to disrupt the system. It can narrow the window in which work can be done safely. It can push tasks earlier. It can compress crews into shorter hours. It can force more breaks. It can increase water needs. It can reduce pace. It can increase mistakes. It can send a worker home sick. It can make the next morning weaker because the previous night did not cool enough. The danger is not only a single catastrophic failure. The danger is margin loss. A food system can absorb many stresses when it has margin. It can shift schedules. It can move crews. It can add cooling. It can adjust irrigation. It can delay a task. It can call in more help. It can rest workers longer. It can protect people well. But every adaptation uses something: time, money, water, electricity, staff, transportation, enforcement capacity, communication. Heat spends margin across the whole system. At first, the spending looks manageable. A crew starts earlier, a supervisor adds water, a farm adjusts shade, a clinic prepares, a household runs cooling longer, a packing facility watches product temperature more carefully, a truck idles with refrigeration. Each action makes sense. Each action can reduce risk, but together they reveal the larger pattern. The heat event is not only outside, it is entering every system that must compensate for it. The calendar begins to tighten. Starting earlier can reduce afternoon exposure, but it may shorten sleep. Ending earlier can protect workers, but it may compress harvest work. Adding rest breaks can prevent illness, but it may require schedule changes. Increasing irrigation can protect crops, but water availability and humidity effects complicate the exposure environment. Running more cooling can protect homes and storage, but it raises energy demand and household costs. There is no single switch that solves the whole heat problem. Every solution has to move through a system. That is what makes the Central Valley a warning. It shows that heat risk is not one hazard sitting on top of society. It is a hazard that uses existing dependencies. It follows the routes that already connect people to work, work to crops, crops to water, water to energy, energy to cooling, cooling to income, income to housing, and housing back to recovery. This is not just a heat wave. This is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system. And once it moves through that labor system, it becomes a food system question. The old preparation calendar was built around known seasons: winter storms, spring planting, summer heat, harvest windows, irrigation schedules, pest pressure, market timing, labor availability. The system was never simple, and farmers have always adapted to difficult conditions. But adaptation becomes harder when the calendar itself shifts. If serious heat arrives earlier, workers may not be fully acclimatized. If hot nights increase, recovery becomes less reliable. If smoke, fire risk, or dry lightning overlap with heat, outdoor work becomes a compound hazard. If water stress overlaps with heat, irrigation decisions become more difficult. If household cooling costs rise, workers may lose recovery at home. If clinics see more heat-related illness, local health systems carry the burden. The event is visible as weather. The pattern is visible as overlap. That overlap is the new baseline question. Not whether every year will be worse than the last, in a simple straight line. Not whether every heat advisory becomes a crisis. The real question is whether the system's old assumptions still hold often enough to keep people safe. Can the night still be counted on to restore the body? Can the morning still be counted on as a safe work window? Can 95 degrees still be treated as a rare threshold, or is it becoming a recurring operating condition? Can shade and water logistics keep up with heat that arrives earlier, lasts longer, or returns more often? Can workers report symptoms without economic fear? Can rural emergency response reach the field fast enough when heat illness turns severe? Can housing cool enough to make tomorrow possible? These are system questions. They are not solved by telling an individual worker to drink more water. Water matters. It can save lives. But if the water is far away, warm, or socially difficult to use, the instruction is incomplete. They are not solved by telling a farm to follow the rules if enforcement, communication, and timing do not reach the actual body in the row. They are not solved by telling families to use air conditioning if the home is inefficient or the bill is too high. Heat exposes the difference between advice and capacity. Capacity is the ability to act on the advice. That is why the Central Valley heat risk is a systems story. It asks whether the people most exposed have the real capacity to respond before injury. It asks whether farms can alter schedules without shifting risk into sleep deprivation. It asks whether public agencies can communicate warnings in ways that reach workers, not only offices. It asks whether clinics and emergency responders are prepared for heat that can arrive quietly and escalate quickly. It asks whether a food system built on outdoor labor can adapt without treating the worker's body as the buffer, because that is the hidden danger. When systems lack enough margin, the body becomes the buffer. If the schedule is tight, the body absorbs the pace. If shade is far, the body absorbs the distance. If water is warm, the body absorbs the inadequate cooling. If the night stays hot, the body absorbs the failed recovery. If the worker cannot speak up, the body absorbs the silence. A system that depends on bodies absorbing stress may continue operating for a time. The food may still move, the shelves may still fill, the official numbers may not yet show crisis, but the cost has not disappeared. It has been transferred downward into the person with the least ability to refuse the load. That is not resilience. That is hidden fragility. Resilience means the system can protect its weakest points before they break. It means rest is built into the operation, not treated as a disruption. It means shade is placed where the body actually needs it. It means water logistics are designed for heat, not merely compliance. It means supervisors are trained to stop work early. It means workers can report symptoms without fear. It means housing and cooling are part of occupational heat risk. Because recovery does not end at the edge of the field. This is the future model the Valley is moving toward, whether it wants to or not. Heat will force the system to decide what counts as infrastructure. Is shade infrastructure? Is water distance infrastructure? Is the 2-hour rest cycle infrastructure? Is a cooled bedroom infrastructure? Is a trusted supervisor infrastructure? Is a clear emergency location infrastructure? In a hotter operating environment, the answer has to be yes. The old infrastructure conversation focused on concrete, canals, roads, pumps, power lines, and reservoirs. Those still matter. In the Central Valley, water infrastructure and energy infrastructure are central to survival and production, but heat adds another category: human recovery infrastructure. The systems that allow a body to cool, sleep, hydrate, and return without carrying dangerous debt. Without that, every other part of the system becomes more brittle. A cold storage facility can protect produce, but it cannot protect a worker's kidneys. A road can carry trucks, but it cannot shorten a worker's heat debt. A forecast can warn of risk, but it cannot create trust in a crew. An irrigation canal can deliver water to crops, but it cannot guarantee that sweat will cool the body when humidity and labor stack together. The future will test these connections. Not only in the Central Valley, other agricultural regions will face their own versions. Heat will enter planting windows, harvest windows, livestock systems, transportation routes, and worker housing. It will not always look like a disaster at first. It may look like earlier starts, more missed days, more fatigue, more heat illness near the edge of reporting, more pressure on small clinics, more cooling costs, more difficulty recruiting and retaining workers, more decisions made under less margin. That is how a new baseline often appears, not as one dramatic announcement, as a quiet rearrangement of normal, a heat threshold crossed more often, a night that cools less often, a rest break needed earlier, a crop window tightened, a clinic preparing sooner, a family running cooling longer, a worker beginning the day with less recovery than before. This does not mean the system is helpless. The Central Valley is not passive. Farmers adapt, workers adapt, public agencies adapt. Heat illness prevention rules exist because past harm produced change. Forecasting tools exist because risk can be anticipated. Research exists because the mechanism can be understood. There are practical interventions that matter, but adaptation has to be honest about what is changing. If the old calendar assumed recovery, the new calendar must plan for failed recovery. If the old workday assumed morning safety, the new workday must measure accumulated load. If the old forecast communication emphasized the daily high, the new communication must include warm nights and worker exposure. If the old safety plan focused only on the field, the new safety plan must connect field, transport, housing, and clinic. The system has to stop treating recovery as private luck. Recovery is now part of the risk model. That may be the most important shift. A worker's ability to cool overnight cannot be separated from whether that worker can safely work the next day. A household's cooling capacity cannot be separated from occupational exposure. A heat advisory cannot be separated from labor rules. A crop schedule cannot be separated from the human body that makes the schedule possible. The Central Valley heat signal shows all of these connections at once. It is a forecast, it is a work rule trigger, it is a health risk, it is a housing issue, it is a water issue, it is an energy issue, it is a food system issue. That does not mean every part is failing. It means every part is connected by heat, and connected systems can surprise people. A small failure in recovery can become a larger failure in work capacity. A delayed rest can become a clinic visit. A clinic visit can become a lost workday. Lost workdays can pressure crews. Pressured crews can increase pace when the next window opens. Increased pace can raise metabolic heat. More heat can increase the need for rest. The loop can reinforce itself unless the system deliberately breaks it. That is the operational challenge. Break the loop early. Do not wait for collapse. Do not wait for the hospital record. Do not wait for the worker to become the evidence. The valley's future will not be decided only by the peak number. It will be decided by whether the system can create enough recovery before the next load arrives. That means forecasting must connect to enforcement. Enforcement must connect to field practice. Field practice must connect to worker trust. Worker trust must connect to income security. Income security must connect to the ability to rest. Rest must connect to the body's need to cool. The chain is long, but the weak points are visible now. This is why the warning cannot be reduced to whether one day is hotter than average. The larger issue is whether the old preparation calendar still matches the world entering the field. If the calendar is wrong, then the system may prepare for yesterday's heat while workers experience today's load. The official signal began with a weather alert. It moved through the headline number. It moved into the hidden night. It moved through wet bulb heat. It moved through one worker. It reached the 2-hour rest cycle. History showed that the mechanism has already caused harm. Now the system pattern is clear. A food system built around outdoor bodies is being tested by heat that no longer respects the old recovery schedule. The final question is how to say that without going beyond the evidence. Because the warning does not need exaggeration, the evidence is already enough. The next step is to draw the line between what this heat signal proves, what it suggests, what it does not prove, and what future it is asking the valley to prepare for. The warning does not need exaggeration. The evidence is already enough. That is where this story has to end, because heat risk becomes less useful when it is overstated. A heat advisory does not prove that every worker will get sick. A hot day does not prove that every farm is unsafe. A forecast near 100 degrees Fahrenheit does not prove that every clinic will be overwhelmed. A warm night does not prove that every household fails to cool. A single heat signal does not prove the full future of the Central Valley by itself. The line matters. If the evidence is stretched too far, the story becomes easier to dismiss. If every hot day is described as the end of everything, people stop hearing the signal. If every injury is assigned to one cause without proof, the real mechanism becomes blurred. If the complexity of work, housing, water, health, income, and regulation is flattened into one dramatic claim, the people most exposed are not better protected. They are made into symbols instead of being seen inside the actual system that shapes their risk. So the boundary has to be clear. What is related, what is only happening at the same time, what is not yet proven, what is already dangerous. The official heat signal is real. The National Weather Service identified heat risk across the valley. The forecast included triple-digit heat potential. Heat risk categories were active. Warm nights were part of the concern. California outdoor work rules recognize 95 degrees Fahrenheit as a threshold where high heat procedures must begin. Public health officials have warned that warm nights can reduce the body's ability to recover. Occupational heat illness has appeared in California records before, especially during severe heat years. Those are not rumors, those are the evidence line. But the evidence does not say that every medical problem during this period is caused by this heat. People become ill for many reasons. A clinic visit can have multiple causes. A worker may be tired for reasons that include heat, but also sleep, health, nutrition, stress, commute, and workload. A farm may have strong protections in place. A supervisor may respond early, a crew may be well trained, shade may be close, water may be cool, rest may arrive on time. The presence of risk does not mean protection is absent everywhere. That is also part of honesty. The story is not that every system is failing. The story is that the margin is being tested, and margins are where disasters often begin. A bridge does not have to collapse for engineers to care about stress. A hospital does not have to overflow for public health officials to prepare. A power grid does not have to go dark for operators to watch demand. A worker does not have to collapse for a heat plan to matter. The purpose of a warning is not to prove damage after the fact. The purpose of a warning is to reduce the chance that damage appears. That is why the official signal matters before the injury count. The forecast is not the disaster, it is the chance to prevent one. The same boundary applies to climate. One heat advisory does not, by itself, explain the entire climate system. No single valley heat event should be treated as a complete proof of long-term change. Weather varies. California has always had hot days. The Central Valley has always been a place where summer heat can be severe. But that fact does not erase the pattern that matters. Scientists and public health officials have warned that hotter conditions, warmer nights, and longer or more intense heat exposure increase health risks. When those risks intersect with outdoor labor, they become more than a graph. They become a question of whether the old work calendar still fits the new heat environment. That is the system question. Not whether California has ever been hot before. It has. The question is whether the systems built around past heat assumptions can still protect people when recovery windows become less reliable. This is not just a heat wave. This is a recovery window failure moving through California's farm labor system. The phrase should not be heard as a slogan. It should be heard as a diagnostic frame. A heat wave describes the outside condition. A recovery window failure describes what happens when the body does not get enough time, cooling, water, and rest to return to safety before the next load arrives. That is the difference between a peak and a pathway. The peak is public, the pathway is lived. The peak is the number repeated on television. The pathway is the worker waking before dawn after a warm night. The peak is 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The pathway is the body that begins the shift with yesterday still inside it. The peak is visible on the map. The pathway is the distance to shade, the warmth of the water, the pressure to continue, the 10-minute rest that must arrive before the body crosses the line. This is why the ending cannot be only about heat. It has to be about assumptions. The old assumption said the night would reset the day. The old assumption said morning work could outrun afternoon danger. The old assumption said outdoor workers could adapt because they had always adapted. The old assumption said water, shade, and rest were enough if they existed somewhere in the system. The old assumption said the public would know danger when it looked dramatic. Heat challenges each of those assumptions, not by breaking everything at once, by reducing the space between safe and unsafe, the space between thirst and dehydration, the space between tired and confused, the space between a break that prevents illness and a break that comes too late, the space between a warm room and a body that cannot recover, the space between a forecast and a medical case. That shrinking space is the real warning. The event that opened this story will pass. The advisory will expire. The forecast discussion will update. The map colors will change. Temperatures will rise and fall again. The valley will continue. Workers will return to fields. Trucks will move. Crops will be harvested. Families will eat food grown in this region without ever knowing the heat that passed through the labor system behind it. That is not reassurance by itself. It is the reason the system can hide the risk. A food system can keep functioning while some people inside it carry more heat than the public sees. A worker can finish a shift and still be harmed. A crew can meet the schedule while losing recovery. A farm can comply with rules and still need to ask whether protections are close enough, early enough, trusted enough, and strong enough for the heat that is arriving. The question is not only whether the system works today. The question is what it costs to make it work. If the cost is carried by the bodies with the least power to refuse, then the system is not as resilient as it looks. This is where the opening image returns. This morning, the signal appeared first as official language. National Weather Service, heat advisory, moderate heat risk, major heat risk pockets, triple-digit heat, warm nights. To most viewers, that language may have sounded like another summer forecast. A warning to stay cool, a reminder to drink water, a map with colors over California. But under that language was a deeper sequence, a hot pattern settling over the valley, a headline number crossing into the workday, a hidden nighttime number reducing recovery, wet bulb heat changing what sweat can do, one worker carrying the mechanism through a shift, a 2-hour rest cycle becoming the hinge between prevention and harm. California history showing that heat has already left evidence behind. A food system calendar revealing how much depends on outdoor bodies returning tomorrow. Once the sequence is visible, the map is harder to read the same way. The color on the map is not only weather, it is a question. Can the worker cool before the next shift? Can the shade be reached before dizziness? Can the water be used before dehydration? Can the supervisor hear the symptom before confusion? Can the ambulance find the field before minutes disappear? Can the room cool before morning? Can the system protect recovery, not only respond to collapse? That is the future echo. The next heat signal may not look catastrophic at first. It may look familiar, a few degrees higher. A warm night, a short advisory, a hot afternoon in a place that knows heat. But the future will not be decided only by the peak number. It will be decided by whether the system still has time to recover before the next load arrives. That applies to bodies. It applies to clinics. It applies to crews. It applies to farms. It applies to households. It applies to the food system. Recovery is not a luxury in a heat event. It is the condition that makes tomorrow possible. That is the central lesson. When heat is framed only as discomfort, the answer is personal endurance. When heat is framed as a system load, the answer becomes operational protection. Move the water closer, move the shade closer, move the rest earlier, move communication faster, move emergency directions into place before the call, move housing and cooling into the risk model, move the worker's body from the edge of the system to the center of the plan. Those are not dramatic statements. They are practical ones. Heat safety is built from ordinary pieces arranged before the body fails. A cup of water before thirst becomes urgent. A shaded rest before confusion. A supervisor who watches closely. A worker who trusts that speaking up will not cost the job. A room that cools enough to sleep. A forecast that reaches the field, not just the office. The future will be shaped by those small things. That may be the most haunting part. The weak point is rarely announced as a weak point. It looks ordinary. 10 minutes. A water jug. A row of crops. A warm bedroom. A morning alarm. A worker saying they are fine. A supervisor deciding whether to stop. A map changing color. Then heat enters. And the ordinary thing becomes the place where the system either protects life or misses its chance. The warning does not need exaggeration because the facts already point to the problem. Heat is returning to the Central Valley. Farm labor remains exposed. Daytime highs matter. Nighttime lows matter. Wet bulb conditions matter. Rest timing matters. History matters. Recovery matters. The evidence is already enough to say this is not only a weather story, it is a labor story, it is a health story, it is a housing story, it is a food system story. It is a story about the old calendar meeting a heat risk that does not wait for the old calendar to catch up. The event will pass, but the thing it revealed will remain. A food system built around old recovery assumptions is being tested by heat that no longer respects the old schedule. The future will not ask only whether California can forecast the next hot day. It will ask whether the people who harvest under that forecast can sleep, cool, drink, rest, speak, and return safely when the next load arrives. So when the next official alert appears, do not look only at the peak temperature. Look at the night. Look at the worker before dawn. Look at the distance to shade. Look at the 2-hour clock. Look at the body trying to recover inside a room that may still be warm. That is where the real warning lives. Not only in the number the day reaches, but in whether the system gives the body enough time to come back before the next day begins.